Britt Moser is a neuroscientist that contributed to the discovery of grid cells in the brain and their role in an animal's location system. She was born in a small town on an island named Fossavoll that is off the west coast of Norway. Her parents owned a farm that was mainly cared for by her mother because her father was a carpenter. The work done by her parents helped influence her belief that hard work makes you happy.
Interest in science definitely began in her early childhood. She had many animals on her farm that she liked to study. She didn't focus on their characteristics but their behavior and why they acted the way that they do. Her studies of the brain later reflected her early interests at this time. She was also strongly influenced by her mother, who wanted to travel and study things.
May's early school life showed signs of her losing motivation and interest in education. She did not work very hard to complete her assignments or pay attention in class. She mainly goofed off with her friends. However, her teachers saw a lot of potential in May and continued to encourage her to work harder in her studies. May's mother also strongly encouraged May to work harder in and get better grades in school. She knew of May's dream to study medicine or science in college in another country. Her mother motivated May by explaining how limited her options for college would be if she did not study harder.
University was awesome. I had a lot of freedom and was very social. I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in yet, and considered doing biology or psychology or maybe becoming a teacher, but I just didn't see myself as one. I met Edvard, who went to the same high school as me, and we quickly became friends. We decided to study psychology together because we were both interested in learning about the brain. During our first year in the psychology program, we published a paper with several of our classmates, Professor Skardal, and it was called Interactional Effects of Personality and Gender Groups, a Missing Perspective in Research, published by the International Journal of Small Group Research. Because of how successful the research was, Professor Skardal encouraged us to study more social psychology. However, Edvard and I want to focus more on the action of the brain.
While working together, May and Edvard's friendship had changed to a romance, and they got engaged on top of Mount Kilimanjaro.
In their second semester, they started in Kirby Golden's lab, who was studying hyperactivity in rats, and they learned a lot about behavioral theory. Edvard and May would non-stop ask about the brain. So May, what do you think?
Can't you go into the brain?
It was time for them to work on their master's thesis, and they realized that to have an opportunity to study the brain directly, they needed to work with Per Anderson in his neurosciences group. For them to be able to work with them, they had to prove themselves to him by reading and understanding a neuroscience lab paper and building a water maze to test rats according to the paper.
May and Edvard wanted to get their PhDs funded by the research committee, but of course they were worried that because they were studying the same area of the brain and they were under the same supervisor, and that the committee was worried about their geographical distributions for their funding. They wouldn't really get it, but eventually May did come up with an idea for their PhDs, and she wanted to submit it, but of course their supervisor was telling her maybe you shouldn't do it, it's not safe enough, but she did do it after winning their little debate going, because when May wants to do something, she doesn't back down, and they got their PhDs funded.
In 1985, May and Edvard got married in Oslo and had their eldest daughter, Isabel. Isabel did not interfere with their research. They brought her along to the lab to watch her. May and Edvard would also take turns taking care of her so they could adjust to having her around in their lives. Eventually, they had their second child, Aylin, in 1995 and made the same adjustments to make time for her. In the autumn of 1995, May and Edvard were called into the Department of Psychology for an interview where they discussed about their lab and their positions. They settled with applying for funding, but they were told to teach students alongside their research. A little while after getting funding for their lab, May and Edvard decided to research about where the signals to place cells come from. Place cells are neurons that fire when the animal is in a specific location in its environment to help provide a map of its environment. To figure out if the signal is from the hippocampus, which was assumed to be true, May made lesions in the hippocampal circuit, but the signals were still present. Because the signals did not appear to come from the hippocampus, May and her team decided to try the entorhinal cortex. The cells they discovered there had spatial signals with a regular firing pattern. The locations where these cells activate form a hexagonal light grid pattern which splits up the environment into equal parts. These cells are called grid cells. In 2014, Britt Moser and her husband Edvard shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine due to their work concerning grid cells. Discovered in 2005 by May and Edvard along with their 4 students, grid cells are types of neurons that allow for many species to understand their position in space. Grid cells are found in the entorhinal cortex of the brain. This discovery suggested a mechanism for dynamic computation of self-position based on continuously updated information about position and direction.
Grid cells are very important. They are part of the space mapping circuitry. It's extremely important because these cells seem to have been preserved across the mammalian evolution. In the rodents, they use the grid cells to form a location-independent coordinates map of multiple length scales, and this means they are able to uniquely identify whatever location the animal visits.
Okay.
These cells can also help to gain some knowledge in cognitive processes. These cells can help to gain insight to spatial deficits associated with the human neurological conditions such as Alzheimer's. These cells are something special.
Throughout her career, May has discovered a few other types of entorhinal cells in the brain that help animals determine their location. Some of the other cells are called head directional cells and border cells. Nowadays, May continues to research the brain along with her husband Edvard, contributing to the understanding of how the brain functions. Currently, May and Edvard are the co-directors and professors at the Kavli Institute for Systems Neuroscience, the Center for Neural Computation.